I came home tired, the kind of tired that sits in your bones. My shirt still smelled like sweat and dust from the warehouse. I was ready to eat whatever was left in the fridge and maybe sit in front of the TV until sleep took me. But before I even touched the door, I heard music. Loud, heavy, shaking the windows like a warning. My stomach dropped. That was my house, but it didn't sound like mine anymore. When I opened the door, it hit me all at once. Smoke in the air, beer spilled on the floor, kids running through the hallway like they paid the bills. My living room was full of faces I had never seen, red cups raised like trophies, sneakers all over the rug I worked months to buy. I stood there with my work boots still on, and not one person turned to notice me. It didn't take long to understand. This wasn't just any party. This was my son's party. My son, the boy I raised, the boy I worked double shifts for, the boy I skipped meals to feed, had filled my house with strangers, and somehow I wasn't even part of it. I wasn't on the list. Not even in the room, really. Just standing at the edge of my own life. I saw him by the stereo, laughing, moving like the house belonged to him alone. He looked happy. Too happy, and I wanted to feel that happiness for him, but all I felt was the sting of being invisible. He didn't look my way. Didn't nod, didn't wave. He knew I was there but acted like I wasn't, like I was the embarrassing part of the story. I walked further in. My couch wasn't mine anymore. My kitchen counter wasn't mine. Even the pictures on the wall, the ones of me holding him as a baby, the ones of birthdays we could barely afford, they were just background noise to everyone else. People leaned against them, laughed under them, never seeing what those frames meant. I was surrounded by pieces of my life, but nobody cared. Not even him. That's the kind of pain you can't prepare for. Not the kind that comes from the world outside. I'm used to that. I've been overlooked at work, ignored in stores, followed around like a shadow in neighborhoods that don't trust men who look like me. But to be pushed aside inside your own home, by your own blood, that cuts deeper than anything else. So I stood there, a stranger in my own house, watching my son shine in a room that erased me. And all I could think was, maybe he really didn't want me there. Maybe he was ashamed of the man who built these walls with tired hands. Maybe he wanted the house but not the father, and that thought sat heavier on me than the hours I worked that day. I stayed standing longer than I should have, like if I froze, maybe the whole thing would fade. But the music didn't stop. The laughter didn't slow, and the floor kept shaking with feet that didn't belong here. I thought about leaving, stepping back outside, pretending I had walked into the wrong place. But where could I go? This was my house. My table, my couch, my walls. I didn't have another space to claim. I tried to walk through, quiet, moving like a shadow. Nobody looked at me twice. A couple bumped into me, spilled beer on my sleeve, didn't even apologize. I could smell the alcohol, the smoke, the mix of sweat and perfume all thick in the air, heavy enough to choke. My boots dragged against the floor, leaving marks only I would notice, because no one else cared. I passed the dining table, the one I found at a second-hand store, sanded down myself, painted just so my kids would have a place to sit. It was covered now in bottles, half-empty cups, sticky stains running off the sides. People leaned against it, laughing, never knowing what it meant to me. I thought of nights when I sat there alone, counting bills, deciding which one could wait, which one I had to pay to keep the lights on. That table held my sacrifices. But tonight it was just a bar for strangers. I moved to the kitchen. My fridge was wide open, hands reaching in and out like it was a corner store. Food I stretched to last the week was being grabbed without thought. Leftovers from the night before gone. The milk I bought with change, emptying into someone's cup like it didn't matter. I felt my stomach twist, not because of the food, but because every piece of it was work. My work, and none of them knew. None of them cared. I looked up at the photos on the wall. My son's baby pictures, his school portraits, family snapshots. I remembered each day we took them. The way I stood proud even when my shirt was the same one I wore to work, even when my smile carried exhaustion. I wanted those photos to remind him where he came from. But the people leaning against that wall didn't see me in them. They didn't see me standing right there. I was invisible in print and in flesh. I kept walking slow, like maybe if I circled enough I'd find some corner left untouched by the noise. But everywhere I went it was the same. My couch full of kids with their feet up, laughing, spilling, shouting. My hallway crowded. Even the bathroom door was lined with people waiting their turn. My house was crowded, but for me it was empty. And then I saw my son again. He was moving through the crowd, head high, smiling, alive in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. People clapped his back, handed him drinks, looked at him like he was somebody. I wanted to be proud. I wanted to feel like maybe all my work was worth it, if it gave him this moment. But deep down it felt like he had erased me to get here. Like to shine, he had to push me into the dark. I leaned against the wall, my chest heavy. I thought about all the nights I left before sunrise, came home after dark. The times I missed meals, missed sleep, missed moments, just so he could have chances I never did. And here I was, a ghost at my own table, my name not spoken, my presence not acknowledged. The worst part wasn't the strangers. It wasn't even the mess or the music. It was the way my own blood could act, like I was just another shadow in the room. That cut deeper than any insult I'd ever heard on the streets. I could take the world overlooking me. I'd been taking that my whole life. But my own son, that was a weight I didn't know how to carry. So I stood there quiet, holding my silence like a shield. And in that moment, I realized something I didn't want to admit. Sometimes the hardest battles ain't out there in the world. Sometimes they're right inside your own house. I thought about turning around and leaving the moment I opened the door. The sound, the smell, the heat of so many bodies moving in a space I worked to build, it hit me like a wall. But where would I go? Out to the street, standing in the dark with my tired boots and sore back, pretend the house wasn't mine, that I was just another man passing by. No, I couldn't leave, not yet. I needed to see with my own eyes what had been done to my home, what my son had turned it into. So I walked in, slow, careful, like a stranger trespassing in somebody else's place. The truth was, that's exactly how I felt. Not the owner, not the father, just another shadow in the corner. The first thing I noticed was the table. My table. It wasn't much when I bought it, just an old piece of wood from a second-hand shop, scratched and leaning on one side. I brought it home, sanded it down myself, painted it, made it strong enough to hold our meals. That table carried the weight of our lives. Bills spread out on it late at night, my son's homework smudged with pencil marks, the dinners I made from whatever scraps I could pull together. But now it was covered in bottles, sticky cups, puddles of liquor running across its surface. Strangers leaned against it, laughing, spilling crumbs, never knowing or caring about the story in the wood beneath their elbows. I moved past them into the kitchen. The fridge door was wide open, hands pulling food out like it was theirs. The leftovers I planned to stretch for 2 more nights were gone, eaten without thought. The milk I bought with change, poured careless into a red cup mixed with cheap liquor. My chest tightened at the sight. It wasn't about the food itself. I could always eat less. It was about what it meant. Every carton of milk, every loaf of bread, every plate in that fridge came from my sweat. From hours of lifting, pushing, carrying until my back ached. And here it was, disappearing into the hands of people who didn't even know my name. The air was thick with smoke, weed, cigarettes, perfume. My lungs felt heavy. The music shook the walls, bass thumping so hard it rattled the pictures hanging crooked. I looked at those photos. My son as a baby, smiling with cake on his face, his first day of school with a backpack too big for his small body. I remembered how I stood proud for those pictures, even when my shirt was worn thin, even when my face showed years of hard work. I wanted him to have proof that I was there, that I gave him everything I had. But nobody looked at those pictures now. People leaned against the wall, laughed under them, brushed them with careless shoulders. My story was right there, framed, visible, and still invisible. I walked down the hallway. My boots dragged against the floor, leaving marks only I would ever notice. The bathroom door had a line of kids waiting, talking loud, phones glowing in their hands. My bedroom door was closed, locked by me earlier that morning, because I didn't trust leaving it open anymore. Behind that door was all I had left. My bed, my clothes, the little box where I kept old letters and pay stubs, proof that I'd been here, proof that I'd tried. Out here in the rest of the house, there was nothing of me left. The couch was packed with bodies, shoes on the cushions, drinks spilled on the fabric. That couch was the first thing I bought after moving in. I remembered saving for months, sleeping on the floor, telling myself I could wait, that I could sacrifice comfort if it meant my son would have a home that looked like a home. Now it was stained, jumped on, treated like nothing, and then I saw him again. My son. He was at the center of it all, smiling wide, laughing, shining. People clapped his back, handed him drinks, moved out of his way like he was important. He carried himself like a man who belonged, and I couldn't decide if that hurt more or less, because part of me wanted to be proud that he could feel that joy, that attention, that light. But the other part of me couldn't breathe, because he was shining in a house I built, while pretending the man who built it didn't exist. I leaned against the wall, heart heavy. The music pounded in my chest, but underneath it was another rhythm, the steady beat of my own shame. I thought about every morning I left before sunrise, every night I came home after dark, the years I gave away to hard labor, the meals I skipped, the dreams I buried. I thought about the time I walked miles because I couldn't afford bus fare just so I could bring him food. I thought about the birthdays I worked through, the nights I swallowed my pride to keep the lights on. Every piece of this house was built from my exhaustion, my sacrifice. And still, here I was, invisible. The worst pain isn't from the strangers. It isn't from the mess or the noise. It's from looking at your own child and realizing he would rather erase you than acknowledge you. That the roof you broke yourself to keep over his head is now a stage he stands on, while you fade into the shadows. I stood there, silent, watching it all. My son dancing, smiling, surrounded by people who only knew the version of him he wanted them to see. They didn't know me and they didn't need to. And maybe that was the point. Maybe he didn't want them to. Maybe he didn't want them to see the man with the rough hands, the tired eyes, the boots that never shine. Maybe he wanted the house, but not the father. And that thought stayed with me longer than the music, heavier than the noise. It sat deep in my chest, reminding me of something I didn't want to admit. Sometimes the cruelest kind of rejection doesn't come from strangers on the street. It comes from the people sitting at your own table. The music in the house was loud, but inside my head it was even louder. Every beat felt like a hammer hitting against memories I couldn't escape. I stood in the corner unseen, watching kids take over the space I had fought years to hold together. They laughed like the walls built themselves, like the lights stayed on by magic, like the roof never leaked when the storms came. They didn't see me, but the house did. The walls, the floor, the furniture, they remembered. I thought about the first winter here. The heating was broken, and the landlord didn't care enough to fix it. I wrapped my son in every blanket we had, holding him through nights so cold I could see our breath in the air. I remember rubbing his hands, blowing into them to keep them warm. I told him not to worry, that I'd take care of it. And I did. I worked extra shifts, stacked every dollar, and bought a second-hand heater to get us through. It was small, cheap, but it kept him from shivering. Nobody at this party knew that story. Nobody cared. But I did, and this house did. I looked at the stains on the wall near the kitchen, old marks from when the pipes burst. I patched them myself. No plumber, just me with a wrench, sweat dripping, cursing under my breath, praying it would hold. I didn't know what I was doing, but I figured it out, because I had to. That's what being a father means when you ain't got money. You fix what's broken, even when you don't know how, and you pray it lasts long enough to give your child one more day of normal. As I walked further in, I saw my old work boots by the door. The leather cracked, soles worn down from years of standing on concrete floors. Those boots had carried me through storms, through snow, through long shifts that broke my back. Every scratch on them was a piece of my story. And yet, to everyone else here, they were just another pair of dirty shoes in the corner. I thought about the meals cooked in this kitchen, nights when all I had was rice and beans, and I stretched it enough to make it feel like a feast. I remembered boiling water to make the house warm, opening the oven door just to fight off the cold. I remembered saving coins in a jar, just enough to buy my son sneakers when his old ones had holes in the soles. He didn't know I skipped lunch for weeks to make that happen. He just smiled when he put them on, proud to wear something new. That smile made me feel like the richest man alive. Now standing in the same kitchen, I felt small. Not rich, not proud, not seen. Just small. The kids laughed, spilled drinks, leaned against the fridge while my memories clung to every corner, screaming for me to remember what I gave up. The echoes of my labor were everywhere, in the walls I painted, in the table I fixed, in the couch I saved for, in the very floor that carried their dancing feet. And my son. My son moved through it all without looking at me. He had a new family tonight. A crowd that cheered for him, lifted him up, made him feel like he belonged. I wanted to understand. I wanted to believe this was just youth, just a phase, just fun. But deep down I couldn't ignore the truth. To make space for them, he had erased me. That realization cut deeper than anything I'd felt before. It wasn't the rejection itself. I'd been rejected by the world plenty of times. Jobs that didn't call back. Stores where clerks followed me around like a thief. Neighbors who locked their doors when I walked by. I'd lived with that kind of invisibility my whole life. But when it comes from your own child, when it happens in the house you built with your sweat, that pain is heavier than any shift, sharper than any insult. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes for a moment. The music thumped. The voices echoed. And all I could hear was my own breathing, slow and heavy, like I was holding back a storm inside me. I thought about everything I sacrificed, every dream I put aside just so he could stand taller than me. And here I was, shrinking in the shadows of my own house. I wanted to ask myself if it was worth it. If all those hours, all those sacrifices meant anything. But I already knew the answer. They meant everything. They were the reason he could even have this party, the reason he had friends, the reason he had a roof, music, light. I gave him the stage, even if he chose to erase my name from the script, and as I stood there, invisible in the middle of my own story, I realized something. The world can strip a man down, break him piece by piece. But the cruelest pain comes when the people you gave everything to choose not to see you standing there. The music didn't slow down. The laughter didn't stop. My sun kept shining in the center of it all, and I stayed in the corner, feeling smaller with every second. But the truth is, this wasn't the first time I felt invisible. This wasn't the first time I carried the weight of being unwanted. The only difference was that now it was happening inside my own house. Under the roof, I broke myself to hold up. That made it heavier than anything I had carried before. I thought back to when I was a boy, the first time I knew what rejection felt like. Standing in line at school, waiting to be picked for a team, and watching kids point past me, around me, through me. Always the last one chosen, if I was chosen at all. I remember standing there, hands in my pockets, pretending it didn't matter. But it did. Even as a child, I learned the silence that comes with being unwanted. Then I grew older, and the rejections grew sharper. Job interviews, where the smile disappeared as soon as I walked in. Supervisors who nodded while I spoke, but had already decided I wasn't good enough. Promotions that skipped over me, like I wasn't standing right there working harder than everyone else. I remember the feeling of shaking another man's hand, knowing the job I needed was already his, even though I could do it with my eyes closed. I learned to swallow that pain, to carry it quiet. Out on the streets it was no different. Walking through neighborhoods where people clutched their purses when they saw me. Police cars slowing down just because I fit the shape of somebody they were looking for. Doors locking when I passed by. I told myself it was just the way of the world. I told myself I was strong enough to live with it. But nothing in those moments compared to what I felt standing in my own living room that night. Because strangers rejecting me was one thing. I could survive that. I had survived that. But when your own child looks past you like you don't exist, that wound cuts into a part of you the world can't touch. I leaned against the wall, staring at the floor, trying to breathe through it. My boots were heavy, my chest heavier. So I thought of the years I gave up pieces of myself just to make sure he had more. Times I went without food so he could eat. Times I walked miles to save bus money so he wouldn't have to. Times I told myself my pain didn't matter, because his smile mattered more. And now I was standing there watching him live in the comfort I built, and realizing that in his eyes, I was nothing. Just a shadow at the edge of his joy. He had a world now that didn't include me. Maybe it was because I was poor. Maybe it was because I was tired. Maybe it was because I was a reminder of struggle, and he wanted to live like the struggle was never there. That thought dug deep. Because all my life, I carried the rejection of the world on my shoulders, but I never expected to carry it from him. From the boy I raised with hands that never stopped working. From the child I carried when he couldn't walk. Fed when I had nothing left for myself. Protected even when I couldn't protect myself. The music pounded. The crowd cheered, and my son stood taller than ever. And I stayed pressed against the wall, silent, invisible, asking myself a question I never wanted to ask. What does a father become when his own child no longer sees him? The answer sat heavy inside me, heavier than the bass shaking the floor, heavier than the years behind me. The truth was simple and cruel. A father becomes a ghost. And that night in my own house, surrounded by echoes of everything I built, I felt myself fading into one. I couldn't breathe inside that house anymore. The air was too thick, too heavy with music, smoke, and the sound of voices that didn't belong to me. My chest felt locked, like the walls were closing in, like the house was pushing me out of the very space I built with my own hands. So I stepped outside. The night air hit me different, cool, sharp, almost like it was cutting through the weight sitting on my shoulders. The streetlights hummed, flickering against cracked sidewalks and corners I knew too well. The block was alive in its own way, kids laughing down the street, sirens echoing in the distance, the sound of trains rolling somewhere far but close enough to remind me the city never sleeps. I walked slow, boots hitting the pavement in rhythm, carrying the kind of silence only a man who's been emptied out can carry. I passed by the corner store, the same one where I stretched dollars to buy bread and milk. I remembered the look of the cashier, counting my coins slow like every penny was too loud. I remembered standing in that line, watching people swipe cards, buy more than I could dream of, while I prayed my change was enough to cover the basics. The neon lights of the store flickered now, just like they always did, and I felt the weight of every time I had to swallow pride on that same corner. Further down, I passed the playground. Rusty swings, chipped paint on the slide. I remembered pushing my son there when he was small, his laughter bright against the noise of the city. Back then it didn't matter how tired I was, or how empty my pockets felt. His smile made me believe the struggle was worth it. That same playground now was empty, shadows stretching long under the streetlight. The echoes of his laughter still hung in the air, but they belonged to another time. I walked past buildings with windows lit, families gathered around tables, silhouettes moving behind curtains. And I wondered if inside those walls, fathers sat invisible too. Fathers who worked themselves raw, only to be forgotten the moment comfort arrived. Maybe I wasn't the only one carrying this silence. Maybe the city was full of ghosts like me, men still breathing but unseen in their own homes. The further I walked, the more memories surfaced. Nights I worked until my hands bled, coming home to an empty plate but a full fridge for my kids. Days I stood in the rain waiting for buses that never came, so I could get to jobs that barely paid. Times I stood in lines at offices, filling out forms, hearing the same quiet rejection. "We'll call you." They never did, and through it all, I carried myself with dignity, even when the world tried to strip it away. I told myself my son would see that one day, that he would know what it cost me to give him even the little I could. But walking those streets, I realized something I didn't want to face. Maybe he didn't want to see it. Maybe he wanted to believe comfort came easy. Maybe he wanted to forget the struggle, even if that meant forgetting me. I stopped at the corner, looking back at my house from a distance. Music still poured out, spilling into the night like the walls couldn't contain it. It was mine and it wasn't mine. My body was outside, but my labor was still inside, holding that roof, lighting those rooms, feeding those strangers. The city around me knew me better than my own son did. The streets remembered my steps. The bus stops remembered my waits. The warehouses remembered my sweat. My name was etched into this neighborhood, even if my own family erased it inside the house. The night was quiet for a moment, and I stood there, breathing, letting the air remind me I was still alive. The world may not see me. My son may not see me. But these streets did. They had carried me, held me, remembered me when no one else would. And in that strange way, I felt less alone. When I finally walked back to the house, the music was still spilling out onto the street. The walls shook with bass, laughter poured out the windows, and it felt like the building itself was alive with a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, staring at it, wondering if I even had the strength to step back inside. It was my address, my bills, my work that paid for it all. Yet I felt like a stranger waiting outside someone else's home. I forced myself through the door, careful not to bump shoulders with the crowd. The air was thicker than before, heat rising from bodies packed too close, smoke twisting toward the ceiling. Nobody noticed me. Nobody cared. I kept my eyes low, moving slow through the same rooms I had already walked earlier, past the table, the couch, the pictures on the wall. Each step reminded me the house wasn't mine tonight. Maybe it never really was. I headed straight for my bedroom door. My hand shook a little when I slid the key in, like even the lock had forgotten me. When I stepped inside, I closed it fast, leaned my back against it, and for the first time all night I could breathe. The music still pounded through the walls, muffled but constant, every beat reminding me of the world just outside my door, the world I wasn't part of. The room was small, plain. A bed pressed against the wall, a dresser with handles missing, a lamp that flickered when I turned it on. But it was mine, my space, my silence. I sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on, and let the weight of the night settle over me. My shoulders slumped, my hands rested heavy on my knees, and I stared at the floor like it had the answers I couldn't find. The noise outside was wild, alive, endless. Inside it was just me. My breathing, my heartbeat, my thoughts running fast, running heavy. I thought about all the years I had poured into this place, into my son, into being a father even when the world never gave me the chance to just be a man. And I thought about how it had all led here, me locked away in my own room, hiding from a party I was never invited to. I looked around the room. The walls were bare, except for a small box tucked under the bed. Inside it were scraps of my life, old pay stubs, letters, photos no one else cared about. Proof that I existed, proof that I tried, proof that I carried more than most men should ever have to carry. I pulled the box out, opened it slow and stared at the pieces. My handwriting on torn envelopes, paychecks that barely covered rent, a picture of me holding my son when he was small, his tiny arms wrapped around my neck, his smile brighter than anything in the room. That picture hurt to look at, because back then I was everything. Back then he saw me. I set it down, pressed my palms against my eyes, and let the silence swallow me. The music outside was still pounding, but it felt far away now. What I heard most was the sound of my own questions. What did I do wrong? Was it because I was poor? Because I worked too much? Because I was tired more than I was joyful? Did I fail him by being the man I had to be? Or was it just the world creeping into him, teaching him to be ashamed of where he came from? The weight pressed down harder the more I thought. My chest ached, my throat tight, but no tears came. I didn't know if I had any left. The years had dried me out, left me hollow in places no one could see. I wasn't angry, not in the way people think. Anger passes. This was deeper. This was rejection, humiliation, loneliness, all rolled into one heavy silence that filled the room with me. I leaned back on the bed, staring at the cracked ceiling. I thought about tomorrow, about waking up to clean the mess left behind. Cups on the floor, stains on the couch, bottles on the table. I knew I'd be the one to pick it all up. I always was. And I wondered if, while I scrubbed the floors, anyone would even remember I was here tonight. The music outside kept playing, but in that room, I felt something shift, a thought I hadn't let myself face before. Maybe I had built this house, but I hadn't built a place where I belonged. Maybe all I ever built was a shelter for others. While I stayed out in the cold, I closed my eyes, let the sound of the bass fade into the distance of my mind, and held on to the only truth I had left. Behind this closed door I was still a man. Invisible to them, maybe, but real to myself. I don't know how long I sat on that bed. Time doesn't move the same when you're buried under silence. The music outside kept pounding, but it started to blur, fading into the background like a storm too far away to touch me. My body was heavy, my chest hollow, but my mind kept spinning. I thought about every wall I painted, every pipe I fixed, every dollar I broke my back to earn. And it hit me hard. Maybe this house was never really mine. Not in the way I wanted it to be. Because bricks don't keep loyalty. Paint doesn't hold memory. Furniture doesn't thank you for the nights you went without. So it could be bought. Houses don't love back. They just sit, waiting for whoever walks in to claim them. And tonight it wasn't me. Tonight my own blood turned this space into something else, something I wasn't part of. That truth cut me open, but sitting there in the quiet, I felt another truth rise up, one I had almost forgotten. I built more than these walls. I built a life out of nothing. I built dignity where there was none offered. I built survival when the world tried to starve me. I built my son, his body, his smile, his laughter, his chances. Whether he saw me or not, whether he erased me tonight or not, I was still the foundation he stood on, and that mattered even if nobody else could see it. I stood up slow and walked to the mirror. The glass was cracked in the corner, but my reflection stared back solid. Tired eyes, rough hands, lines across my face from years of work, a body worn down but still standing. That was me, not the ghost in the corner of the party, not the embarrassment erased from the guest list. Me, a man who had carried more than most and was still here, unbroken. The music outside shifted, a song ending, voices rising louder. For a moment I thought about opening the door, stepping out, demanding my place. But I didn't. Not because I was afraid, because I realized I didn't need to. They could take the couch, the table, the fridge, the walls. They could even take my name off the guest list. But they could never take the truth. I am the house. I am the work. I am the reason the lights stay on, the reason there's food to eat, the reason there's even a roof above their heads. I sat back on the bed, calmer now. The rejection still hurt, sharp in my chest, but underneath it there was something steadier. A quiet strength I had almost lost under all the noise. My son could ignore me. The party could erase me, but my story was still here. In the boots by the door, in the scars on my hands, in the long shifts that broke my body but never my will. That story was mine, and nobody could take it. Eventually the music outside would die down. The strangers would leave. The bottles would empty. And I'd be the one left standing, cleaning, repairing, building again. That's what I had always done. That's what fathers like me do. And maybe one day, when the noise fades from my son's life, he'll see it. He'll see me. Even if he doesn't, I'll still be here. Solid, unshaken. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the bass fade into the distance. The party wasn't mine, the house wasn't mine, not tonight. But my life was, my dignity was, my truth was. And that was enough to keep me standing, because at the end of it all I am the house.